ones, 'cause they're free. Happy sing for eternity. Without God and His Son, Jesus, everything is peaceful and gladness. Happy always doing His will. Happy always doing His will. Overcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you as you take your seats. It's a different kind of evening tonight. I guess I'll start by saying Gwen's reminded us the past few assemblies that we're in the month of dedication. She's given a very powerful couple of dedication messages. She's mentioned original members. She's talked about all the warfare. She's given some examples and tied it back to Scripture and how what we're going through in these modern times has happened throughout history when God to raise up and lift up and protect a remnant of His people. But it comes at great cost and great sacrifice and with a lot of pain. And we're the blessed recipients of having had the privilege of hearing more than 30 years worth of words from Gwen. She's literally spoken millions of words. She's literally written and videotaped, recorded millions of words and has not had to retract a single one. That's remarkable. It's remarkable. It hasn't changed. So while the truth is what births the changed lives, and the truth births the testimonies that we then go out and share, it inspires the music, it inspires new levels of service and volunteer activities. It spurs teamwork. It brings marriages back together, families back together. It helps end every kind of stronghold. Our responsibility, when we have the opportunity to do so, is not just give a testimony. Here's how my life has changed, and that's powerful. And you're going to hear some of that tonight. But in addition to that, there's another way that we are not only have an opportunity, but are responsible for, and that is bearing witness. And so Gwen's lead for tonight was to have some of the men who are part of that original members group, those families that came in the first year and a half, 2 years from back in that 1999 into early 2001 range. And so she suggested, why don't, during this month of dedication, and we're still in that kind of that thought mode right now, is let's have some of the men come up who've been around a long time and share some of the stories. Because if you're new, and especially for the children as well, because if you're under age 10, you probably have no idea what Gwen and her family and what those early families had to go through for this to even exist. And so tonight's we're gonna rewind the clock. We're gonna move forward with kind of a timeline of testimonies and memories and reminisce in a good way to remind us all, as Gwen has taught us, never to become complacent and to pass it down so that it doesn't get lost for the next generation. Because we are living in a time of bounty right now, and it took years and years before it felt like that. And so I'll get us started and then introduce each one of the guys as they share their thoughts and perspective and their praises to God and their stories and what they remember and what they witnessed. So unless you're very brand new, I'll just kind of go a quick rewind the clock back to the 80s. So Gwen, as she's told the story many times, it's recorded, but we'll just use it as part of the timeline to come forward. So mid-80s, Gwen just is excited about sharing her relationship with God. She has people come into her at whatever church they're attending at the time because it's obvious she's different. There's a glow about her. She had lost all her weight. She had found hunger and fullness at this time. And she just, as anybody who's known Gwen for longer than 5 minutes, you know that God is always on the mouth. And in the churches we all grew up in, I mean, you might have said the word God a couple of times in a scripture in a 2-hour service, but maybe it was just to read scripture and for the preacher to tell a couple of jokes. And it wasn't this passion that we see from a Gwen and that we've all learned to imitate and follow. So people were just curious. How are you the way you are? So you say you lost your weight by what? What hunger and fullness, what's that? You know? And so she starts talking to these people one-on-one and goes into one-on-one counsel in Memphis, Tennessee. And that quickly becomes a request, a demand from more and more people who are hearing about this amazing person who has not only helped me lose weight through something called hunger and fullness, but just from talking to her, the way she talks about God and the way she goes to the scriptures, it makes me not want to smoke. It makes me want to be at peace with my spouse. It makes me want to be a better parent. And so those earliest seeds of what we now know as Way Down Ministries and Remnant Fellowship Churches started way back when Gwen was just being Gwen, just talking to people. And she hasn't changed. She's always been that way. It's always been a magnet, drawing people to God. And so you move through the late 80s and people start requesting, if I could just have not just the words when you're speaking to me one-on-one, could you put it like on a cassette tape and maybe write them down? And I can get some of the girls, some of the ladies together at church, and 10 of us will listen at one time. And again, bear with me if you've heard all this before, but it's important for anybody who's new. It's also important to know that Gwen never sought out to put herself forward and teach everybody. She was literally dragged into it. She's like, no. I thought everybody felt this way about God. I mean, you've heard Gwen say that. But it became clear over time that okay, God really wants her to do this. So the first Way Down classes form, and immediately it just starts blowing up. They're making cassette tapes, and she's writing stuff down, writing the Rise Above the Magnetic Pole, the refrigerator, workbook, all that stuff that dates back to the late 80s, early 90s. Gets a contract with Doubleday, major publisher, to write what we had learned back then was the Way Down Diet book, and filmed the Exodus Out of Egypt Change series. That was the one we filmed actually in Egypt, or in front of the pyramids. And so by this time, Way Down is into the thousands, hundreds of thousands. Now millions of people, as we move through the 90s, have heard of Gwen. And this lady from Tennessee who just gushes about God like she's literally in love with him. And it was so foreign to people. And what's crazy about it is it was so foreign to people in churches that someone would gush with this love for God. So it was obvious that God was lifting her up. Well, a strange thing happened as the 90s, and Way Down was at the peak, and Gwen was at the peak of Larry King Live in 2020, and The View, and everybody. Again, a lot of you've heard this, but it's important to know that at that same time as Way Down was reaching its height and its peak, she was always interested in feedback from how people were doing. She started to hear, after people had now done Way Down for a while, in their old churches, or in their churches, in a class, they were slowly starting to gain their weight back. She would hear back from people, I lost 50 pounds the first time through, but now I'm back, put 25 back on. And Gwen realized, what they're hearing on Sunday and Wednesday from their preachers and their classes has to be different from what I'm telling them. Because if they were really just doing this the whole time, you would stay convicted, it would be permanent, you'd keep it off. So that led Gwen to start digging into the quote unquote state of the church. Why is the church like it is? Why, when she looks at statistics, we're into like 98 now, 1998. Why does the church have as much sin, as much addiction as the world? Why do people who say I'm a Christian really aren't any different than those who don't say I'm a Christian? They're just going to a church building for 3 hours a week. So she opened these, originally were Thursday night, and became Friday night Bible studies. Now, mind you, Way Down at its peak had over 130 paid employees when it was Way Down Workshop. You've all been to the building. And every week we had devotionals, and very often Gwen would speak. She'd give a short message at the devotionals. Well, she was so excited. Any of us that were around and close at that time, she was so excited about what she was finding, because not only was it helping people lose weight and stop smoking and fix their marriages and fix their finances, now she had this incredible wisdom, this insight in, wait a minute, Paul, 1 Corinthians 5, you've heard that scripture, expel the immoral brother. Oh my word, the church is not hearing the message. Way Down's just been relegated to a classroom. You've heard her use that phrase before. So they must be hearing something different. This is exciting. She was excited. I'm gonna share this. Surely my staff of over 130, and who knows how many volunteers, surely my staff will be excited about this, because God's used her to introduce all of us to these incredible revelations on how to change our lives and have a personal relationship with God. And now we're gonna take it back to the churches, and the churches are gonna all become pure and become more unified, and God's gonna get all the glory, and that's not what happened. So what I'm about to say is really pretty ludicrous, but it happened. and it needs to be said. At those devotionals, with these over 130 employees, Gwen would speak, and she started getting into why that it wasn't a false grace message and all the things we've heard Gwen say. I don't need to repeat all those. The point is that one of my responsibilities as that time was to sit off to the side and put in a cassette tape and record everything that she said so we could have that on record. What was interesting is that out of over 130 employees, what I saw on their faces, about 7 or 8, and those 7 or 8 people are still here today, were edge of their seat, nodding like that, like this is incredible clapping. And the other 90 to 95% had a scowl on their face. I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. This is somebody that God's used to change every aspect of your life and your life and your life, and you look like you're mad at what she's saying. And so it became very clear to Gwen early on that people protecting their own old religion, their own old churches, their own old preachers, their Christian books that they wanted, authors they wanted to hang on to, that was a huge last stronghold for a lot of people. So the opposition that you hear Gwen talk about, the spiritual warfare, the attacks that a lot of you have been through from family members, longtime friends, coworkers, thinking you're doing something weird, all that started inside the Way Down office. If you can imagine that, walking in that building now, and it's just joy and peace and love for the entire time that the majority of you have been here. But there was a time back in 1998, 99, even into 2000, where, it was, the people who were, you could count on 2 hands, the number of people who really were excited about what Gwen was saying. People like Amy Stites and Michelle McDonald and Jan Rubel and Jenny Mendel and Joe Langston and of course Jennifer Martin and me and maybe a few others. But what else was going on? It became clear that there was a mutiny. There was betrayal going on, because you would walk by, if you were one of those people that was in the list that I just mentioned, and you walked by a conversation, you've experienced it. Oh, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. People started leaving Way Down one by one by one, angrily leaving Way Down, because they didn't like that Gwen was saying that the church they wanted to hang on to their false grace message. They wanted to hang on to their sin. And Gwen was exposing yet another thing that if they put it into practice, they would have the opportunity to change. They didn't want to change that one last thing. So you had betrayal going on in the office. So people are taking a paycheck, but talking bad about the person who's giving them that paycheck behind their back. I find that ludicrous, and it still makes me kind of mad when I think about it from 20 years ago. So fast forward, so the Friday night Bible studies, the very last one happens in, probably February of 1999, and Gwen's got a speaking engagement set for Dallas, Texas, to an audience of about 2,000. That became what you now know as the State of the Church message. And in that message, if you haven't gone back and watched it in a while, go back and watch it. Gwen had already come to the conclusion through all these Bible studies, I can't stay in the church system the way it is. I got to start over. You just got to start over. So on that very last Bible study that night, where you're digging into church history and where did it go wrong and why is the church so split? Why is there so much sin? She's literally digging through books and scriptures and so forth. And it finally came to the conclusion, we just got to start over. So on that last Friday night Bible study, she said, anyone who wants to come, my family will be here this weekend in the back of the building at a table, and all are welcome. It was not a very big group that was in the Bible study at that time. It started out large and dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. Well, so March of 1999, the second or the third weekend, Gwen and of course Michael and Elizabeth, Gwen's family, and then Jennifer and I and Ashton, who was 3 at the time, and then Avery was inside Jennifer, sat at a table and read the scriptures and shared and played songs and never went back. And just after that, you had the Mendels, you had the Langstons, Rubels, and so many more. It took a while for the numbers to kind of catch up, but it was a war at the time. And all the while, we're excited about this little group in this church that God is building and using Gwen to build. You still got people gossiping about it the entire time and still taking a paycheck, which I still can't believe. And then as other people started to join, their family members and their old friends would all of a sudden stop me if don't stop me, but every one of you has probably heard this conversation before with someone close to. You got a phone call, a text, an email, somebody stopped you and said, "We're concerned for you. We're really concerned. We have some concerns for you." Never anything specific. And so when you shared in response how God had changed your life and used this person in this ministry to change your life, and now God's opening our eyes to, the church is supposed to be pure. It's not just supposed to be the same as the world. And you had explained, which part are you concerned about? Is it the devotionals? Is it talking about God? Is it sharing testimonies? Is it reading the Bible, laying down sin, singing songs with acoustic guitars, and watching our children play? Which part of that are you concerned about? It didn't matter. It didn't matter. God was allowing Satan to do this. And so the opposition was strong. I will tell you this, though, before we turn it over to these guys, to remember kind of that 1998, 1999 initial first year and a half. It felt like, if you've seen, and I'm not recommending you go see it, but if you've seen the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, that's what it felt like spiritually. You couldn't go a day without somebody sniping at you and somebody mocking you, questioning you, and saying you're weird, and somebody telling you they were concerned. But nevertheless, God added to our number daily. And he gave Gwen such vision and such strength and such positivity. And Michael and Elizabeth and the friends that they were starting to influence, the original youth group, stayed so positive through it. The cool thing was that in the midst of all that battle and what was just constant spiritual gunfire, it actually drew us all closer. It actually drew us all closer together. So it was definitely a purpose behind it, even though it felt like it was relentless. But I can tell you through all that, if you think about your own testing, if there's ever been a moment of doubt that you've had, this is so hard. Do I really want to go through this with all these family members and it's just so hard. It's so hard. It's so hard. I'll just tell you that back in the first even few months when it was just a handful of people, never once, I'll say something about your leader, our leader and her family, her kids, never once was there a conversation. Not public, not private. Never was there one single conversation about, you sure you want to keep doing this? This is really hard. Are you sure? Maybe we just, maybe it'd just be better. Let's just push the way down thing forward. Let's just lay off the church thing for a while. And that never happened once. So, it was never about numbers for Gwen. It was never about numbers with that early group. It was, is it right to do? Okay, well then it's right to do. What does it matter what the numbers are? It's just right. It's just right. Being pure, pulling out, starting over, where 2 or 3 together. I never forget that scripture, where 2 or 3 are gathered together. So when those words are written, it had to have been assumed, well, at some point, there's going to be a time when all you can find is 2 or 3 people. And we happen to have lived through that time over these past 20 years. But it took a tremendous amount of sacrifice, loss of reputation, lies told about her and her family and about those early members, great financial loss, but at the cost of birthing what this is. So now we're going to turn to 2 of the guys who were there during those earliest years, 98, 99, 2000. We'll start with Jonathan Walters, who's a part of that original youth group with Michael and Elizabeth and a handful of others, and then followed by Ryan McCauley. So guys, that kind of sets a framework for 1998, 99, 2000. Share some memories, some things that'll be helpful for people to know. Maybe they didn't know.
Sure. No, thank you, David. And my name is Jonathan Walters. In my late 30s now, and it's amazing to look back. Half my life now, it's been part of this Remnant Fellowship Church, and I would say it's the far better half of my life here in this place. And just before going into some of the personal aspects as well, just two key points. One of which you kind of hit on just for a bit there too, David. I have so much respect and love for Gwen and for Michael and for Elizabeth. I think anything that any of the gentlemen here any of us get to share. It's a perspective of getting to view some of these situations and to physically be there for part of them, to see and to hear these things going on around us. But it was never like my name in a newspaper. It was never my face being distorted. It was never my name in any of the local news channels. And so the respect for that family and that through all of those things that were occurring, and obviously Gwen caring more about establishing something that's pure for God than an income stream or reputation actually built, our faith a lot, because we saw her family get closer to God. We saw a lot of fruit that would come out of that from a leadership and a love perspective too. And so through all those events, this family, they never looked back, as you said, but they also in every situation looked out for all of these members too, to make sure we were all doing okay and we were getting spiritually fed and that our needs were met through all of it too. And so just so much love and respect for what that family went through, so that all of us today, now literally 20 years and 30 or 40 years for Gwen, could have something like this for our children. And we come into a peaceful, a beautiful church on an evening like this, and it's our favorite night, and Saturday's our favorite day to be here. And so, what we have today, for me and my family, we greatly cherish because of the lives that were laid down by that family. Just additionally too, just one point that you were making that just was so, I guess, odd at the time, but kind of humorous too, is that the front part of my life, so the first 20 years, I would say, were it was really upside down. And I grew up in church. A lot of you guys have heard my testimony before. My father preached. I was at pretty much every service from the day I was born until probably college, pretty much, And so every service though was really empty for us. We came from a church that, the religion was pretty dead. I mean, nobody really thought you could have really a real relationship with God. I never really heard about an answered prayer, never had really a sign from God or really anything that was, active in my life that said, hey, God existed or whatever too. And so, year after year kind of went by, and you get kind of more bored with it. You kind of get pulled by the world here and there. And then you kind of look up. I looked up one day, I'm in college and I'm still going to church, but like the church I'm going to, in college, I mean, it had half of the attendance from the college group on a Sunday morning, because most of us had, we drank too much the night before, we were out too late, and honestly, most of us couldn't make it into church, on Sunday morning. So you come in Sunday night, the youth group would be 2 or 3 times the size, so we could come and get communion. We'd be okay that way, come get some bread and some wine, give $5 or whatever, and then we'd literally leave from church and go clubbing. And so that was kind of church to us at that stage, But what was interesting is nobody was really concerned. I was in love with money. I was a really greedy person, very lustful guy, had, really bad relationships. I was in a fraternity. I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have done in those days. And there wasn't really one person that ever came up to me and said, hey, Jonathan, I'm really concerned about, how you're living. But the moment that, I got to come here and this little group of 20, 30 people, these families, these marriages, you can see that there's love between. I remember meeting Patrick and Amy and Mark and Tish and you and your wife. And of course, I'd met the Shamblins and Hannahs before, and my wife now, my now wife Jessica, that invited me to church. But I saw all the love in this place, and you start you hear Gwen speak for the first time, and she's encouraging you and giving you all these tools on how to change your life, and you literally start. And this is part of our group in the early days.
Baby face.
I don't look any different, David. I don't know, but
that's a compliment. You look fantastic.
No, just kidding. But you get to this church though, and you start seeing this fruit, and you're like, oh my word, I lay down over drinking and my life's better, or I lay down that lust and God gives this jewel back, or this relationship back that you didn't think was possible, or you lay down your pride and then you start to have friends, which is really crazy, and you start to see this fruit and you're like, man, my life is it's truly getting better. And then all of a sudden your family gets really concerned, that you're starting to really love and adore God, and you're starting to do better at your work, do better at school, and really have these relationships that start to right side. And so it was at that point in time that kind of makes you kind of get interested, because we are really enjoying having a relationship with God, and it's something that none of us as men or women had ever before we met Gwen or heard her speak. And so that to me was huge, and it wanted to push me on that, and seeing the families living this out and their lives getting better as well. And so it was really encouraging. I'll say though, for that family, what they went through was tremendous for the sake of for God first, but then for all of us as families to have really a legacy or a connection with God, whatever you want to call it, something that you can truly pass down, to your children. And, I remember I met Jessica, Michael, Elizabeth in the local university that we were at. And the first time I saw them, I could tell that there was something different. And I had never really seen love shown before. And even this is in a school setting. And I remember meeting Michael too. And I don't think I'd ever met a college guy that had a relationship with God, and he respected his mom. He wasn't scared to talk good about her in front of others, and he was very supportive of this church and what she was doing, and so I had never seen that, and so it was really interesting. And so getting to spend time with them early on, though, I remember walking into school one day, and everybody was holding this newspaper or whatever. I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And that was when I guess Gwen had released the statement that she believed Jesus was the Son of God. That seems pretty normal. That seems pretty right. Yet there's this, distorted dot matrix face, and people are walking around with these newspapers and putting them up in the air. And these are people that were, out drinking and partying the night before. They didn't really care anything about God, 2 days ago. But all of a sudden here, it's a controversy and it's an issue. And it started to springboard, a lot of persecution there in that place. And even in school, I would say we would meet up. If I saw, Elizabeth or Michael or Nathan or Brandon, Kimberly was there at the time too, Aaron, all that group, that was like, honestly, the peak of our day. And we would literally look for one another, to be able to go from class to class. And, there were instances where teachers would openly speak negatively about Way Down or about that family. And that family had honestly supported a lot of the efforts in that school, had helped build buildings there, a lot of funding as well too, that a lot of the students and faculty enjoyed. And here they were, bad-mouthing as well. And so we had, guys like Colin who would literally speak up in public for this place and for this message. Colin Moore, yes, and one of our dearest friends. And it was a battle day in and day out. What I'll say is that through all that, Ashlon, the home of Gwen, was open every probably Friday and Saturday night, not just for those that were close in our close group, but literally for any of the students to come. The first time I ever met Gwen was actually her home was open, and we had probably 150 of the freshmen and seniors, from college come in, and the house was open and there were activities, and, she's feeding everybody and stuff too, showing around the home, and the whole home was open, the first time I ever got to meet her. And so there would always be these opportunities to show love and to reach out. And so with all of the persecution, that family continued to encourage all of us, this is about God and his kingdom, and there could be somebody in this group that's lonely or hurting, or really wants this truth. And so while the masses may have mocked it, or the masses may have, made fun of it, or, said bad things about it, et cetera, there were a few people that ended up coming out of that university too, and that are still here today, and their families increasing in wisdom and blessing and the fruits of the Spirit. And so there was fruit that, that came from those moments. But our families too, for me, my family got concerned because I left the church that I had been a part of for 17, 18 years. It had nothing to do that there was fruit now in my life, but it was just, you're not going to go to our church. That's tough. And so they would all get together with people that they would never in a million years ever be friends with, but they were mockers of this message, or people who were actively antagonizing this message. And they were pretty grotesque looking, honestly. Most of these people, they ever met them face to face, they would never want to spend time with them or see them, but they bonded or connected on, your child's going to this church, well, my child's going to this church too, So there were secret meetings held about us. Our families would get together behind our backs, and they would, I heard they had this flamage thing where they try to recreate what's the Trinity, and they put 3 candles together and try to make it one and call it one flamage. It sounded pretty confusing, but it was, just ridiculous type of stuff. And here for us, and for my situation personally, my family didn't have it together. And so even in the church lives, going to church, we would fight the entire way there. There was no peace in our home. There were all these sins that were going on in our families, yet here now they were, really actively working against us and against the church, to really try to put it down. And so there were opportunities for all of us, in those early days to really make a stand and say, hey, this church is really important to us, and it's helped change our lives. And we saw, Gwen and her family having to make those stands as well too, and we had, the courage or whatever too to move forward. And I'll just say, those early days were tough because you feel like you're one out of a million, or you're one out of 2 million, And today it can get really easy because you can go, like in the town that we're in here in Brentwood, it's a prominent town here, in the state of Tennessee, but you can go to the supermarket and you'll see 10 of your, closest friends from the church, or you go to work and you've got saints working, there in the walls of your church, and so or the walls of your employment, the places where you work. And so it's easy sometimes to think, hey, I'm just, part of this, and this was all started easily, but the pain that came through it, I know has produced great joy and great fruit, for all of our families. And I would say that their family as well has borne great fruit in all of us too, to give us courage and hope, for this next generation. And so to even get to see that and to be a part of it. And one thing that you had mentioned too, it created such a tightness across our group. When you're really fighting hard, and we continue to fight hard. I mean, this war hasn't stopped, right? I mean, it's battling and raging around us every day. We have to make these right decisions. But even in the midst of where you feel like you're very small and the opposition's very large, it does create, so to speak, a band of brothers. And some of the men on the stage, and I think about the people that I was talking about earlier that I was close with. I mean, we talk daily, and we know how people are doing spiritually. We're helping each other out, with our tests. And the friendships that were really birthed, 20 years ago are stronger even than they were then. And it built a really closeness and a really deep friendship that I know will last, we'll probably be 70, 80 years old and still, and still friends and fighting for this church if God gives us that chance, and that breath and that life. And so it's amazing what the original founding families have been through this, and just a tremendous amount of gratitude for what we all get to come in, and enjoy today. I know I personally take it for granted sometimes, and so these opportunities are beautiful to go back and recount.
Amen. Amen. And by the way, in 70 years, you'll still look just like this. You'll still look like you're 30 years old.
Right.
All right, Ryan McCauley.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share some of these memories with everyone tonight. And we're all going to say it, but I want to back it up too that, if it weren't for Gwen and the Shamblins and the Hannahs and that family, that none of us would be here. So we're all very grateful. And they went through more than anybody. So I got to witness a lot of things that they went through and some of these other leaders went through. And I don't feel like my tests were as hard as theirs, but I will gladly bear witness to what they've been through. I also, like Jonathan, grew up in a church family, and we went to church every week, 3 times a week, but still, you knew something wasn't quite right. And in college, I met my wife Rachel, and she had heard that Gwen, she had lost 50 pounds through weigh down before we met, and she had heard that Gwen was starting a church, and she was very interested. And we at the time we're engaged and to be married soon, and she wanted me to come check it out, and I said, okay, well, I'll you go first, tell me how it was, and we'll see. So she went and checked it out, and just after the first visit, there was a change in her. And I was like, okay, I gotta go check this out. I go see what it's about. And so I went, and all I heard was truth. And I was like, okay, this is it. This is what we've been looking for. And I was in college to study Bible and ministry. And I guess for me, like the first kind of personal, kind of where the rubber meets the road was, some professors I've been talking to about my future career path, when we talked about Remnant, they let me know that, okay, you can go ahead and do this, but you're not going to get a job. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll do something else. And so, it's like God just directs and guides, and we all, he puts us in places where we need to be to get us where we want to be when we're looking for him. And I praise God that that's what he did for us. And what we got to see in the first couple of years was, of course, being taught how to love God first, how to glorify God, how to look for ways to glorify God every day, and every moment of every day. But as these guys have already talked about, the world didn't like it, and even people who had nothing in their lives that would glorify God, they didn't want you telling them that they were wrong. Of course, you don't even have to say it. You convict them by your life and by your actions, and they didn't want to see that. They didn't want to have any of that conviction to change. And so they began attacking. And of course, they attacked Gwen and her family. And so you had in the Nashville area, you had some reporters who made it their pet project to attack at every opportunity. And so her name was, always coming up whenever they could get the opportunity to say something bad and twist things around and slander. And so that so she had to put up with that, but she kept going. She kept the church on track, and we had plenty of people those first families that had kids that were younger were falsely accused to the family services that they were doing something wrong. And so a lot of them had to go through investigations, which is very stressful. Even though you know that you've not done anything wrong, it's very stressful because you don't know how the system is gonna respond and who they're gonna believe. Are they gonna believe you and what they see in front of them, or are they gonna believe what people are saying about you that don't know you? A lot of us had family persecutions, Jonathan mentioned, and meetings. Rachel and I both had experiences with our family, members of our family being part of these meetings, and the only thing they had in common was that they wanted this place to stop, to be destroyed. And so that kind of puts you in a difficult situation at family meals sometimes, but God gives you the words, and God, they can still see the light that you're doing something right, but they don't like it, so they keep attacking. And enough time, usually given enough time, those attacks will end. You just have to stick it out and do what you know is right. There was also some of these people that were the leaders of these groups would try and get involved, and so they'd get all the families together. They'd feed things to the reporters, and of course the culmination of that, unfortunately, is that we have Joseph and Sonia Smith are paying the price for that. So yeah, there's been a lot of things that we've witnessed, but all I can say is that I was blind, but now I see, and that's kind of where it ends up for us. So,
amen. Well said. Okay. All right. So that's kind of we could go on and on for hours and hours and hours, but just to cover more ground. So we now move into like 2000, 2001. You've seen the video clip of Gwen at Desert Oasis 2000. I see nodding heads. Actually, a lot of people in this room were at Desert Oasis 2000 by your own testimonies. And we knew, the staff knew behind the scenes that Gwen was prepared to go ahead and officially, word was getting around that Gwen had started a church, but she was about to make a public announcement with a prepared video and words from her heart. You've seen those tears and the pain she was going through. And she references it specifically and has described it many times over the years as it felt like the pain of giving birth, that God was asking her to do this and go through this suffering. And she did it. And she knew, we all knew behind the scenes, the gates of Hades are about to open up. Satan is going to be furious if you announce this to the world, because so much good was going on here. And Satan exists to antagonize and to pull you off the narrow path. So when you see those tears, it's not because this was just hard to do. It was, she knew what was to come after it and did it anyway. And we're all grateful. If she had just said, you know what, let's let people come to us and ask about it, then maybe half this room wouldn't be here. And so grateful that she did that. That 30 minutes alone she would probably call some of her greatest suffering, and knowing what was happening, and for the family to know what was going to happen. So now though, so on the heels of that, she's still writing, she's still recording, starting to work on Way Down Advanced, starting to get out and travel and go to different speaking engagements. And so the warfare is hot, it's heavy, it's real. So what would most public relations firms tell a public figure to do when that's going on? Lay low. Stay out of the limelight for a while. This too shall pass. Don't worry about it. But that's not what Gwen did. Sometimes the best defense is a great offense. So we went out on the road, and she traveled more, not less, more. The baby was birthed. By the way, rewinding the clock just about a year, right as or right before the remnant was even being formed and getting off the ground, their family had purchased the land that we're on right now as a significant investment. This place in this part of Tennessee is worth a lot. And she decided early on that she was going to donate this land. Their family was going to donate this land for the use of God's kingdom, whatever that was going to grow to be. There was no picture of it exactly at the time. We just knew we were on the right path. So we've got pictures from way back when there of some of us, the early group, and little kids that are now grown and married and having kids of their own, running around back when this was a field. Another interesting piece about this field, it was untouched land. Only thing that had been on this was horses and so forth. And so this is all that's been built on this land. So another beautiful piece of symbolism. You go back and watch the movie Jeremiah. She just saw symbolism in that. Jeremiah buys a field. And so all that was happening at that time. Now, so after Desert Oasis 2000 and the meeting afterwards where it was, is anybody else interested in doing this where you live? Because up to that point, it was just a few people in Nashville. So, over 300 people showed up at the Way Down building. That got whittled down to where all we had left by September of 2000, where we transitioned to Kent Smith and Cliff Peters. We had Chris and April Herbst starting Remnant, Florida. Kent and Regina Smith, along with Mike and Cassandra Biling, Remnant, Oklahoma. You had Mark and Therese Marie Jost, Cliff and Lisa Peters out in California, Steve and Mary Morin out in South Bend, Indiana, Rich and Kelly Gadke up in Ohio. So those were your first satellite churches. But this is before remnants, before webcasting, before texting. I mean, they would meet on their own, and we would rotate churches like one weekend assembly, we'd conference call in with Oklahoma. And the next one, we conference call in with California. So these people were on their own a lot. So we now transition to the growth of the remnant outside of Nashville, and Kent representing his family in Oklahoma, and then Cliff representing California, just to talk about that experience and what some of what you guys went through briefly.
Amen. Well, I too, as all of us up here and all of us in the church, have a great deal of love for the Shamblin Hannon families and a high level of respect. I know that I can only imagine what they had to endure, as we've all talked about it. And David, you said it, and also Jonathan, that we didn't have our names plastered around. We weren't being made fun of publicly. Maybe we were privately by our families or friends, but not publicly. And it takes a very extremely strong faith in God, and that that you're on the right path to continue doing what you're doing. Because of what we all know, the easy, as you just said, David, the easy way out is to back off and lay low. And hey, I'll just keep this for my family. We found a gold mine here, and I'll just keep it. They didn't do it, and so it just translates into, like I said, a great deal of love, high level of respect. And I love talking about this thing because it reminds you, and we're called to remember. God tells us to remember these things because it deepens the appreciation we have for what we have. And so just real quick on us, Regina had taken Way Down in 1999. I had heard some of what she was learning. It was definitely making me pay attention because of what I was hearing. I was agreeing with it. It was not what was being taught at our church. And it got us to the level where we were fed up with the hypocrisy that was going on in our church. And not that we were perfect and right by any means, but we were striving for it. And we were wanting to listen. And Regina was hosting a Way Down class in our church at the time. This is 1999, and actually was made fun of by the senior pastor. And he had a very disparaging remark about Regina and her class, and not knowing that as he was walking in saying this to someone, that the class was meeting in that room. and God totally lifted his skirt, and just it was bad, and so we knew what was being taught here was the truth. And Regina came, as you referenced, into 2000, the DO, where Gwen mentioned the church, showed the video. And at that point, Regina and I were pretty much had enough of our church. We just didn't know where we were going to go, what we were going to do. I mean, that's where we had been for so long. Our family had been there. And Regina came back with this video. She said, "Look, I want you to watch this video." I was like, okay. And so it was the video that was made of the Remnant video and the people that were on there. And I was fascinated. And this was now at the end of July, early August. And we decided after that we were going to leave our church. We made our stand, left our church. And we didn't know where we were going to go, what we were going to do, but we decided we were going to make a journey out here Labor Day weekend of 2000, and we did. And we met at that time. The Langstons hosted a dinner, and you guys were there, and David and Jennifer is what I'm saying. Rick and Jenny Mendel were there, Robbie and Donna Bass, and I'm trying to think, of course, the Langstons. And if I left anybody out, forgive me, but it was beautiful to see what happened, because immediately when we got there, the children, Andrea, Margaret, the Langston, they took our children and just started playing with them and entertaining them, and we were impressed with that. And then we got to talk with you guys. The men got to talk with the men, and me and Regina got to talk with the ladies, and we were amazed that there was this group of passionate people that loved God above all things, and that had listened and learned from Gwen. That we were just amazed at that, and we felt an immediate bonding. I mean, the bonding was immediate, because the common ground that we had was that we wanted to go all in for God. I mean, that was it. That was the common ground. So we left that weekend. Still, I'm impressed. We weren't convinced that we were going to start our home church at that time. We weren't convinced. And some of it was a little bit of pressure. What are the people going to think around us, if we do this? But after calling back several times to the Way Down office at that time, and there was no other church that was going on in Oklahoma, we decided, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to start, and we did. The first time we met was a Wednesday. The Bilings were there. Mike and Cassandra were there the very first time, and then. The rest is history, as they say. That was in September of 2000. October of 2000 was the first Remnant weekend where you guys hosted, and we came out. And it was a very small group. It was the ones that you mentioned. Yep. That was it. That was all that was there. And Gwen took all Saturday, Sunday, just taught. I mean, just built up. And as we know, she's excellent at many things, but she was excellent at checking in to make sure that there was buy-in. Like, okay, are you tracking with me? Are we? And always concern, as we pointed out, was concern, making sure that if I haven't addressed something, that you have a question, tell me now, because I want to cover this. And so anyway, she, just kept solidifying. I think in November, we came back for something similar. We just couldn't get enough, basically, is what I'm saying, is we just could not get enough of like-minded fellowship and believers. Then our church locally kept growing, because Regina would host Way Down classes at our house, and we got up to where in 2001, summer of 2001, we probably had close to 30 people that were meeting in our house. And in February of 2001 is the first time we met Ted and Candace. Philip and Alexa were just babies. I mean, a few months old. They'd both been born in September, and this was in February. I mean, I know you were, this is probably the first time I met Jonathan, was there in Dallas. And then after that, you guys came to our house on your way to Kansas, and we actually hosted you guys at our house for an event. And our house had never been more blessed to host that at that location. And then we just kept going. We did, like you said, I was on the phone with David Martin a lot during those early days, just like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys reading now? What are you guys talking about? So I could, and then in turn, just share it with what was happening in our local group. Because as you said, there was no conference calls, no webcasting. It was just us. And you would, again, being forward thinking and wanting to shore up the churches that were meeting, you sent us the worship, CD, and we would play that and tapes from Gwen. And so we would incorporate all that. And then eventually, of course, we were able to buy a conference call phone, and you would say, hey, you guys this week call so-and-so location. I remember one time that we called, this is most memorable to me, is Mary Ann Parsons and her children up in Canada. And I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, here's this lady thousands of miles away, has all these young kids, and she's doing this. And now, look, she lives here too, and her children, a lot of them are in the church, and she's got grandbabies here. So, I mean, it's neat to think about those things. And so, anyway, we just knew that God had put us in the right place. Our heart was solidified. We were doing everything that we could. It wasn't easy. I remember having to call David with a few things. One was one of the church families that came to us early on decided that they didn't like what Gwen was teaching after one of the weekends here, and they wanted to pull out, and they wanted all the money. We had incorporated, because you had encouraged everyone to incorporate as a church, and we had incorporated, and they wanted all the money they had given to the church. And I remember calling David, go, okay, what do I do? I've never been leading a church like this before, but I know when I left my church that I just left, I didn't ask for all the money back that I put in. What do I do? And so David said, don't cause a fuss. Just
I talked to Gwen.
Yeah,
Gwen said,
okay.
tell them don't cause a...
Yeah, that's
just
it.
Turn the other cheek.
Turn the
Go
other
the extra
cheek.
mile.
Give them the money.
Yeah.
So we did. We gave, We gave the money back, and anyway, so it's just encouraging to think about that, because God did a lot of things in our lives at that point. You guys came back in June of 2002, I know, and you had an event at the University of Oklahoma, and Gwen talked there, another kind of like a rebuilding the wall thing. And that next day, that was a Saturday, that next Sunday, you came to our house, had a church service. We did baptisms at our place in Oklahoma. So it was a neat time. You think about all that and how far we've come. And at the very first time I was meeting with the Bylings, Regina and I were, at that time, we just had Joshua and Jacqueline, and that's it. And they had one son and Michael. And I never even thought that this was possible to have a church like this, and to where we can actually meet now together and, have 900 people here on any Sabbath or Wednesday assembly, and close to that many more joining us via webcast. I never even had the forward sight to see that far. I was just living in that moment. But God has given Gwen a vision, and she is a visionary among other things, but I know in the back of her mind that she saw something like this happening. And I'm sure that in the back of her mind now, she sees it in the future, how much it's going to grow. But we, again, your song, David, never going back again, never looking back. We've never turned back. We're not looking back. Now we've got two other children, or two other boys since we joined. I have grandchildren now. And so it's a great life to know that you're in the right place, and God's put you here, and that you have something now that is truth to pass down to the next generation. Because before this, we didn't have anything. And one last thing before I pass it on to Cliff is that I remember also one of those early tapes that Gwen put out when she may have been rebuilding the wall, something like that, or the state of the church, where she says in one of the tapes, it's an old one, that she says, if you think everything's great with the church and you think everything's fine, just stop this video, this cassette right now, because you don't need to listen anymore. We don't have anything in common. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to keep listening. In that same tape, I believe it is, David, you were given a testimony, and you said, because of this message, I've given my life completely over to God. And I wrote that down because that was a very simple thing for me to be able to say to people who were detractors of what we were doing and were coming at us for what we were doing. And I couldn't say maybe a lot of things, but I could say that because of this message, because of what Gwen's taught, because of what she's been faithful, I've been able to give my life completely over to God. And I'd spent my years, up to that, 38 years up to that point in churches and could never say that, ever. And so that's what I continue to remember, those sayings. I could go on like we all could. We could go on for hours about what God has done in our lives and the blessings it's been to be members here. But I look forward to the days to come, and knowing I'm sure that God's going to continue to refine us and keep us going stronger. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. Amen. I wouldn't.
Well said. A couple thoughts from Cliff Peters.
I'm definitely honored to be even up here, purely miraculous. And David, just back up everything that you have brought up this evening about this truth and about Gwen, 100%. And just a brief history for myself is I grew up in church all my life, same church. We were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And so anytime the doors were open, we were there. And it was a very traditional type of church, 1,000 people or so. A large auditorium seats about 1,500 people. A lot of judgmentalness, a lot of cliquish, a lot of just legalism type of stuff that I grew up with. And in 1998 is when my wife, Lisa, introduced me to Way Down for the first time, and I was 40 years old then. And I heard somebody talking in that class. It was Gwen, and I just heard this voice that was of somebody that was totally in love with God, that had an amazing relationship with God, and it wasn't fake, it was real. Where, before I did all the Promise Keepers, I did all the retreats, I did all that stuff, and it was fake. It was not a real religion. It was just something to do to make you feel good for about 2 weeks, and then you're back in your same garbage again. And in 1998, our marriage was horrible. And I told Lisa, I said, I think I'm done. I just don't, I'm 40 years old. Halfway through my life, I don't think I want to keep doing this. And so she introduced me to Way Down. And it definitely, that's where the change in my life started. And that's where it had to start. My life had to change first. And so in 99, Lisa had come to DO, and she came home. She was real excited, and she said, they've just started this church, and it's not real public, it's kind of quiet, but they've started this church, and she was all excited. And I said, well, that's great. I'm glad that they did that. We're here in California, they're in Tennessee, and that's great. I just love doing these classes, and it's awesome. And so she said, well, maybe we could do something at our house where we have people over, we'll do some worship music. And I said, have at it, have fun with that. And so I did not support her very much in that. So she kept doing classes in our house, and I was taking them did Strongholds classes, and then she came to DO in 2000. And actually, Therese, Jost, and her came. And they came back, and she was really excited. And she just said, because Gwen had started talking about the church and what was going on. And I'm going, why would I join something like that? We've got our church here. And, I'd looked at other churches, and they're all saying the same thing. So why change churches? That didn't make any sense to me either. And so she kept talking to me about it. And during that year too, I said, my solution was, well, I'll tell you what, Lisa, why don't we, just get involved with our church. Let's do everything that we can. Let's teach Sunday school class. Let's do everything that we can, volunteer for everything. Maybe that will change. That was a big fat zero. And people weren't interested in what we were talking about. So, and there were a lot of people in our church that had come to Way Down and heard it and lost weight. And so fast forward to October of 2000, and the Jose and us, we decided that we're gonna come out. They were doing the weekends, and they'd opened up this last weekend up in October. And so Mark and I talked and said, yeah, let's go over there. Why not? And my whole attitude was that, yeah, we're going to go there, and I'll just show her that this is nothing, and we'll come back and be happy and just keep going like we have been. And so we came in, and there's probably about 50 people there. And first time I'd met the Smiths. And so Gwen, like Kent was saying, Gwen took us on that Saturday all day and all day Sunday, and we were sitting in a U-shaped table. And she took us from Genesis to Revelation, went through the whole Bible in the weekend. And just, and being in the Way Down classes before, and my heart had changed. My life had changed substantially. And I learned that God does speak through his word, and he does speak to us, and that we can have this relationship with him. And, I was slow to move, slow to do anything. And so Gwen took this 50 people through the Bible that weekend. And first thing she did, she sat us down on that Saturday morning, and she went around to everybody. She said, well, why are you here? What are you wanting to learn? What are you doing here? Why did you come? And so everybody gave their answer, and being the prideful self that I was back then, I said, I'm just here to appease my wife. And she said, okay, well, I appreciate your honesty. And so we went through that weekend, and by Sunday evening, my head was spinning. I mean, it was, whoa, I can't believe what I've heard. I cannot believe what is going on here. This is amazing. And just solidified a lot of those relationships, like Kent was saying, got to know some people and just saw that this was real. This was not a bunch of fake people here. There were saints in the back. They served us the whole weekend. I'm going, these people they're just waiting back there to serve us. And to ask us, what do you need? And it blew me away. It was incredible. And I'd never experienced anything like that. And so the next morning we were supposed to leave, and that was October 31st of 2000. And Lisa says, I guess maybe we need to think about this. And I said, I know. I get it, because my head's still spinning. And so, by then I was already doing Bible flops. I'd learned that. And so I said, I get it. So my Bible flopped open to Isaiah, and it talked about the idolatry in the temple and the priests, and it was on and on and on and on. I closed it. I said, okay. I said, I've got the direction from God, what we're supposed to do. She said, oh, yeah, what is that? And I said, well, we're leaving our church. We're joining the Remnant Fellowship. And she said, are you sure? I said, oh, absolutely. It was so clear to me. Are you kidding me? This is so clear. And it was funny because she said, well, maybe we could kind of stop going slowly. I said, oh, absolutely not. I'm not. No, I'm not. Oh, God. So, and it's kind of ironic, on the flight back home, we'd gotten a Wall Street Journal, and that was the day that they had announced. They had this horrible dot matrix picture of Gwen on the front of it about her, about the Trinity and all that stuff. And I said, well, I don't know what we're coming home to, but I really don't care. And so we got home, and it was so funny because our pastor, who had we'd never really interacted hardly ever with, calls us up and wants to meet us to talk to us. And I'm going, sure, man, we can tell him all about what we learned. He'll love it. And so we did. We met with him, and it was not that great. But we just laid it out to just said, this is what we're doing. This is the direction that God has led us, and this is what we're doing. And we did get a little persecution from some family members, mainly dads and some family members. But, when God gives you a directive, and who has a sign? I have a sign. I get signs from God. And so when God makes it so clear, when he gives you those signs, you go, okay, that's the direction I'm going to go. And it's being led by his Spirit. And it's only through what I've heard here. I never heard this before. I learned this only through this truth and this message. Otherwise, I'd be still in my garbage, what I was in before. So of course, actually the Joseph and I lived about 10 minutes from each other. Mark and I grew up together, same church, same schools, same everything. So we knew each other. So we started meeting. And the Joseph had actually left the same church a year before we did. And so we called them and said, hey, okay, this is what we're all doing now. So we started meeting at the Joe's house. And it was very humble beginnings. It was just the two families, and would meet, I think would start about 8 a.m. And we just, what did we do? I don't know, just start reading scripture, I think that's what Gwen's lead is. So we just started reading through scripture, and then we'd start sharing, and would share this is what I read during the week. And we'd spend 2-3 hours just reading through the Bible and talking about God. It was amazing. I'd never experienced something like that before. And we ended up spending, back then it was on Sundays, but we'd spend all day together. We'd have lunch, we'd spend the rest of the day together. And then a few families started joining, Arnheimers, Chrismans, Redemans, and Eichenberries. They would drive an hour and a half each way to come meet with us. So they would leave about 5 a.m. To come meet with us. And it was just a time that we just grew really tight as a group. And then, of course, eventually the speakerphone, we got the speakerphone, so we'd hear. And then, like Kent was saying, we got the opportunities, the out-of-towners would talk to each other once in a while. They say, hey, call these guys, and you guys can connect. And so we got to connect with a few of the families that had joined, that had started different groups. And it was such a blessing, and to be able to for us and the Jose and these other families to change the direction of our families. And that is huge, to be able to take, and we were going this way, we're not doing that anymore, we're going this way. And so we were excited when the webcast started, because we could see everybody then, and we were typically flying back for the festivals, and it would just come back and refresh and regroup, and then in 2005 God directed us to move here. And so I wouldn't want to go anywhere else. This is definitely the truth, and what's being taught here is so transforming in this world that has no hope. It gave me hope. It gave my family hope, and which I didn't have before, even though I'd been going to the church for 40 years. And so my life has been completely blessed by being here, by being around saints. And this, like I said before, this is so real. It's not fake. This is real. This is truth. And the fruit that has been born here is just beyond belief. It is beyond belief. And so I'm so grateful for this truth. I'm grateful that this is something that I can pass down to my family, my children, my grandchildren, and they can pass it down, because this message and what is taught here does not change. It's the same. It's the same as I heard it 20 years ago. And it has not changed. It just gets stronger, if anything. It gets better, and it is definitely something, like Kent said too, is we get to pass this down to the next generation, and just pray that mantle keeps going. So I'm grateful to God for this, and it's the best thing in the world. Thank you.
Amen. And real briefly, just to kind of start to wrap up here with Patrick Stites, Gwen said it from the stage many, many times. If you're looking for a definition of the word volunteer, servant, hard worker, dedicated, committed, you'd find Patrick and Amy Stites and Joseph Maria Langston at the top of that list. And so while the traveling continued, the warfare continued, it was time to design and build this building. And by the way, Gwen donated the funds for every square inch and designed every square inch of everything you see inside and outside of that building. Patrick even comes from a construction family, so you've seen what construction's like here, you've seen what it is in the world. All of you actually were involved in all these topics, but speak specifically towards that, the miracle of this coming together and God's Spirit leading on Gwen.
I don't know if we have enough time, but I just, for the sake of brevity, I will say, like most of these men, or all of these men, I grew up going to church every week, 3 times a week, but I came in here with a lot of pride. And the most stunning and fascinating thing to me was watching Gwen find the Spirit's lead through this property that David mentioned earlier, through the church, the building of this. That was the beginning of the EI, where she hired men to help build the church. We would come over here after work every day and work on it for hours until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And the most powerful lesson for me, just very briefly, as we were doing that, is learning that my time was not my own. And I would, Joseph would give me a job and say, okay, go do this. And so I would spend 2 hours, 3 hours working on it. And then he'd come by and go, forget about that. We're not doing that anymore. And the flesh part of me would go, what? That was 3 hours. But I learned they were looking for God's Spirit, that Gwen was looking for God's Spirit. And the result of that is this amazing building that we get to worship in each week. And if you've never come in here when it's quiet, when there's nobody here, and brought your children in here to read these words that are written at the top of the sanctuary, you must do that. And if you haven't stopped to look at what God led her to put in here through all the different places that items were bought for the church, and the church was built around all these things, it truly is, it's amazing. And I sat in meetings with architects where she would say, this is what we want it to look like. And she had pictures of the old church in Bennington, Vermont. And they would come back with some awful, modern-looking monstrosity. And she would go, no, this is what we want for it to look like. And they couldn't get it. They didn't have the Spirit of God. And so through her persistence in looking for God's lead and sitting in meetings with the city council or the planning commission, they couldn't understand how a church of 80 people here locally with half as many worldwide were going to build this amazing place. And yet she persisted, and this is what came out of it. And so just to wrap up very briefly, I would encourage you to grab one of these men and buy them dinner, and I'm sure they'd love to tell you about those early days, because it's fascinating. And some of my favorite times are hearing David talk about, everything that he shared. And as these pictures are scrolling, one of the things that Gwen did, and I don't know if there's a picture of it, and I don't remember exactly how it's written, but in the top of the steeple, she wrote something to the effect of, "May this be here until Jesus comes back." And I've heard some of you say before, I wish I was here in the beginning. Let me share, this is the beginning. This is only the beginning of what God is going to do, because through following the Spirit, I'm watching Elizabeth and I'm watching Michael take this and carry it so that you can share with your children and your grandchildren and prayerfully your great-grandchildren what God did in these early days. This place is only 20 years old. It's a child in the sense that this is going to be here for 1,000 years or more. So you are here in the beginning. You're here to see what God has done at the very beginning. And one day when all of us are old and gray, except for Jonathan, then you can say, I knew those guys when they were young men. I knew those guys when they were strong enough to build this building, and pass that on to your kids. And the last thing I'll say is, Gwen has shared many times Deuteronomy 6 and how he impresses them, or he tells them to impress upon their children the law of the Lord, to remind them of where they came from. And so that would be my encouragement. And that's one thing we try to do with our children, is to remind them where we came from. These stories are amazing, and David's memory is unbelievable when it comes to where we've come from. And I pray that when I am old and gray, that I have the memory to be able to tell my children and my grandchildren and your grandchildren where we came from and how God brought us to this point. So I'm thankful for this. I'm thankful that we get the opportunity to reminisce about what God has done, and I pray that we get to do it more often.
Amen. Amen. Well, as we close, praise God. Thank you, God. As we close, just a couple of quick points as we close, just to put a bow on this. If your spouse is in this with you, just be so grateful. I want to give honor to my wife, Jennifer, who's been one in spirit on this the entire time. She has so much love for Gwen and for this family, and it's Gwen didn't have that. Gwen didn't have that support at home when this started. So she's been through more pain than anybody. I've had that with Jennifer. She's had that with me. These men have had it, that support. And so that's a whole other thing that those of us where both of you are here, you don't even think about it because you've never had to be without it. And so that's another kudo. In conclusion, in keeping the kids in mind, you know, you probably all saw the last Avengers Infinity War movie, and at the end they've got one of the heroes has to go through and examine all the different timelines, and there's only one out of 14 million that can beat the bad guy. I won't go in, most of you've seen it. Well, I will say this, it's actually a very good analogy. It's a good comparison. Gwen has had literally, in just the 20 years that I've been around, and she's been doing it for almost 40, she's had thousands of opportunities to take this a different direction. Thousands of opportunities to take the easy road. And yet here we are on the narrow path. And so the encouragement to all of us and to the kids, she's found that one path to the Father, and I get to be on it. I mean, putting teaching into practice, that path, not just the act of sitting in this building. Like she said before, you're not remnant just because you sit in this building. You're remnant if you follow this path to Jesus Christ. So what a beautiful analogy to think of that for some reason God's allowed us to be on this one narrow path. So I'm not going to use Gwen's phrase, that's hers to use the you can overcome. I will say though, I'm grateful for a leader. I think we should give honor where honor is due, to Gwen, to her husband Joe, to Brandon, to Elizabeth, to Michael L. Shamblin. None of us would have any of these stories, these testimonies, without that. It took somebody leading. So stay on the path. Have a blessed evening. Have a blessed night.
Up in heaven, angels dance 'cause they're free. Happy dance 'cause they're free. Happy sing for eternity with our God and His Son Jesus. Everything is peaceful and lightness.